Hello, my loves. Namah Shivaya. So, Swamiji and I were talking about sun salutations and moon salutations and Chandra Yoga. And I got thinking that this would be a great opportunity for me to talk to you about the pineal gland. And I want to talk to you about the pineal gland because I think there's a lot of misinformation about it, and I wanted to kind of clear that up with a couple ideas. Something that he said, which kind of sparked this idea, and I wanted to go in a little bit deeper about, was that the pineal gland connects us to higher kind of astral consciousness. And I think this is true, but it doesn't really need any magical, kind of spooky ways of doing this. That's not how it works. The pineal gland, it's a gland, so it produces melatonin and serotonin. And now melatonin makes you go to sleep at night, and serotonin makes you wake up in the morning. So the pineal gland is actually a primitive eye, and some amphibians, some reptiles, still have it visible. So if you look on the heads of some frogs, you'll actually see this little lump right in there, and that's the pineal gland. But in humans, it gets kind of swallowed up by our big old cerebrums. And what that means is that it's still functioning like an eye. So it's sensitive to the UV rays that are coming out from the sun. Now, it's also important to note physically where it's located within the brain. And it's interesting because it's this tiny, tiny little gland. And it's actually most people kind of get it confused with like Ajna chakra, which is right here. The pineal gland is actually back here. It's actually in the geometric center of the back part of your brain. Now, when you look at how the brain works, you wake up in the morning and you go through what neuroscientists call stages of arousal. So as you go from completely asleep, completely unconscious, through completely awake, like I am right now, you can actually measure the way that your brain is organizing all these different states, and it's doing it by means of what are called cymatics. So you know how you can take a plate of a copper plate that's covered in sand, and you can vibrate it at different frequencies, right? And when you vibrate it at different frequencies, you get different kinds of patterns. So the same thing happens with your brain. So when you vibrate it at a very low frequency, you get a certain pattern, and that's when you're just kind of waking up in the morning. And when you vibrate it at a very high frequency, when you're very awake and happy, then you get a different type of pattern. And depending on what those patterns look like, you have different parts of the brain that activate. And so the whole brain, physically speaking, this isn't even on the astral level, this is the physical level, the brain itself is wired and organized according to geometry and vibration. And the geometry and vibration is directly linked into the rising of the sun and the introduction of UV light into the system and the setting of the sun. And so when you do something like a sun salutation or a moon salutation, what you're doing is you are consciously engaging these vibratory changes, which are all centered around the pineal gland, which has to do with just physiological waking and sleeping. So let's take this up to the higher level. Let's take this up to the level of spiritual awakening and sleeping. So when you're spiritually awake, you're accessing a higher vibration, and it's connected in some ways because we grow out of the physical world, so it's connected to the physical world. But those vibrations are in our consciousness, are in a much subtler, more spiritual level than pure physicality. Because the sun's going to come up and the sun's going to set, and you're going to have all of these cycles that are happening with the physical planets, and you might not be aligned with that. You might be sleeping in late. You might be exhausted. Your biorhythms might be off. And so I think a lot of what Chandra Yoga is, and what yoga in general is getting the physical patterns to unite with the astral patterns. And that's why the pineal gland is important. So there's a lot of iffy stuff out there, but I really love the way that Swamiji put it, and I kind of wanted to expand on this a little bit, because it's not woo. It's literally just how we're formed. The other thing that really informs how your brain works, other than day-night cycles of sleeping and waking, is the way that you breathe. And the way that you breathe is actually largely dependent on the pituitary gland. So we have these two different kind of cyclical effects. We have the front of the brain stuff, because the pituitary gland is right here. It's like on the top of your nasal cavity. And so when you inhale through your nose, like you do in pranayama, you are actually kind of squeezing the pituitary gland a little bit, and this sends signals to the thalamus, and the thalamus is connected to the rest of the whole cerebrum. So when we breathe through our nose, we're affecting the cycles and the rhythms in our physical brain, which then affects the cycles and the rhythms in our astral spiritual consciousness. Third point, you have the fluctuations in your cerebrum are responding to your breath through your nose, but they're also responding to your breath through your belly. Because when you breathe through your belly, you're activating the vagus nerve. So the whole body is already just ready to go to get integrated with the astral world on a higher level. And the natural world has given us these tools. And I think that's a really important thing to think about when you're doing yoga. And I think that's something that Swamiji is really good at getting at. And it's one of the reasons why I think you should study with him. Thank you. Namah Shivaya.